Hi, and welcome to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. Our mission here at Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live well in spite of your mental health challenge by sharing insights through interviews, practical tools for living well, encouragement, and courage for overcoming all from a Christian perspective. And now, here's your host, Pastor Brad Hafes.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I'm Brad Hafes, your host. Our purpose here on Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live a faith-filled, rich, and full life in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. In the last year, I've had the opportunity to be part of something that's been happening out in Washington, D.C., along with HHS and the SAMHSA, and the faith initiative that George W. Bush put into place when he was in office. And so we're glad to have with us today Shannon Royce, who is the director of the Center for Faith and Opportunity Initiatives in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. She is an attorney. I didn't know that until I read her bio today. She's just a fabulous woman who heads up this staff, and I wanted to speak with her today, and she's been so gracious to give us some of her time so that we could talk about what has been going on between the HHS and the mental health community and the faith community. So welcome, Shannon. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Brad. I'm delighted to join you.
Yes, and our listeners come from all over in the world, but mainly from the United States. So I think this will be of encouragement to our listeners to hear about how the role and the connection and the bridges that are being built and really the power of, or the encouragement of knowing that the mental health community respects and understands the need for the faith community to plug in mental health healing and recovery and things like that. Would you mind telling us about this process and how it kind of started and a little bit about the work you guys have been doing with those of us in the... Great.
Be happy to share with you. First, I think it's important for your listeners to understand a little bit of our own personal story. Our family is touched by mental health challenges, and as a result, I founded a little ministry about 10 years ago now called chosenfamilies.org and ran that little ministry for 6 years. It was really a ministry that provided encouragement and hope to those living with various hidden disabilities, including mental health challenges. So it included families of those on the spectrum, those living with mental health issues, even those with neurological concerns like epilepsy, and just the life changes that are brought about by being touched by those kinds of health concerns.
Sure.
Put that ministry on the shelf in the fall or in December, frankly, of 2016, because I really felt like God was leading me to do that. And 3 months later was offered a job to come work at HHS. So it was certainly providential the way God led me here and just the history of how he brought me to concerns about those living with mental illness and their caregivers and family members who walk that journey with them on a daily basis.
Yeah.
When I came into the center, Brad, working with my colleague Ben Odell, who is our point person on these issues for us, I just really felt compelled that there was so much work to do in this arena dealing with particularly serious mental illness.
Yes.
Those living with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, major depression, and other really challenging mental health concerns, that I challenged our team to take this issue as one of our key initiatives in my time here. So
Yes.
we started a process of really looking at two sides of the coin. We want to engage the faith community to better understand living with mental illness, the effects on daily life, the effects on interacting in a faith community, the needs of the family as well as the individual living with serious mental illness, and just how the faith community can engage to surround that individual with encouragement, community care, and those kinds of emotional and spiritual support that people living with mental illness really, frankly, all of us really require. So we've been working on the faith side of the picture to educate and encourage and empower faith leaders around the nation from various denominations, various cultural, religious backgrounds to engage in a knowledgeable, principled, thoughtful way in meeting the needs of those living with serious mental illness and their family members.
Absolutely.
And then on the flip side of that coin, we've been engaging with the clinical community, speaking with key leaders from the American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association, American Counseling Association, and various other groups dealing with social work and that kind of thing, to really challenge them with the understanding and recognition that the research tells us that if you include religion and spirituality and faith in the treatment plan of someone living with a mental health challenge, whether as a clinician you have any faith at all, if you include that faith perspective in the treatment regimen for your client, for your patient, those patients do better.
Yes.
And so having conversations on both sides of this picture, the faith community to help them be more comfortable in addressing these issues, the clinical community to make them more comfortable in dealing on the faith side of the picture, and really trying to build bridges between those two communities so that they're less afraid of each other, they're comfortable talking to each other, there's an enhanced trust taking place, recognizing that each part of this picture, the faith leaders as well as the clinical leaders, bring a critical element to that client or that patient living with mental health challenges.
Yes.
So that was a lot of words, but that's what we're doing.
No, I think it takes a lot of words to describe it. It's so critical for those of us who have faith and those of us who have lived experience with mental illness to know that there's this hope that the two communities really can start connecting and working together, as opposed to many times being afraid of each other or standoffish.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know.
Well, and I think the work of Fresh Hope's one of the critical things that you provide in your work there at Fresh Hope is that you have a knowledge and understanding of both of those worlds. And so as a person of faith and as a person with lived experience, you're interacting with the faith community on one side and the clinical community on the other. Your work and your presence in itself is a bridge-building kind of presence. So it's really important.
Well, and I think for those of you listening, I think this is a point of really rejoicing, celebration, and a point of hope, if you will, bright hope, because the Faith Initiative folks have been really bringing together some very important pieces to the puzzle and to stand in the gap, so to speak, for connecting these two communities. As you've done that, because I know you've brought together some of us that are the faith folks and said, how do we make sure faith communities understand the issues, as well as how can we be more sensitive? How can we help people access care if possible? Then on the other side, I know you've had the meetings with those who are clinicians and on the science side of it, or the helping community or the mental health community. What are you finding?
Well, I think one of the critical things that we need to remember is that we're holistic creatures. And so we're physical, we're spiritual, we're emotional, we're biosocial. There are different pieces of being whole people.
Absolutely.
And because of that, if we remember that and we really focus on that, we recognize that serving people and living in relationship with people with whatever challenge there is, you have to take a holistic approach. So it's really critical that the clinical community do the clinical side of the picture. Pastors and faith leaders are not clinicians who should be diagnosing people.
Right.
The example I use in conversation with our team here, with Ben and the rest of the team, is that I'm also a lymphoma survivor. And when I was diagnosed with lymphoma almost 14 years ago now, my husband and I made an appointment with our pastor and his wife, and we went to dinner. Now, when we did that, Brad, I wasn't looking for any kind of diagnostic information from my pastor. I wasn't looking for him to give me a treatment protocol. We didn't need those things from our pastor. We were getting that from our clinician, from my oncologist, and those who were serving my physical medical needs. But what we did need from our pastor and our church family was their encouragement and their support, and the meals that they brought to our family when I was going through treatment. That was recognizing the strength that each community could bring. So the clinicians in the mental health arena need to bring the diagnosis, and they need to bring the pharmaceuticals that may be in play for some people living with serious mental illness, various treatment protocols. That's what the clinical side of the picture brings to bear. But the faith side of the picture brings community, brings companionship, encouragement. All of those pieces, when we remember that we're whole people, those different pieces coming together are really critical.
Absolutely. And I think maybe where the only difference might be is that people with mental health struggles many times first show up at their clergy and their pastor's offices, not knowing for sure what the issue is. And so they end up, you know what I'm saying, the pastor then has to send them to the doctor or send them to the clinician and to the folks that can help. I liken that to me not being the doctor. I'm not even a medical person, but I have to be trained in enough knowledge of that I could do CPR if somebody was having a heart attack or wasn't breathing in front of me or whatever. And so we have to help get people to that place. Now, one of the things that you mentioned that I think is so important for those of us who are clergy and those of us who are ministry leaders, no matter what brand of Christianity we are or what faith we are. You know, it could be Buddhist or it could be Muslim or any of the faith communities, is to understand that the same thing we do if somebody has lymphoma, we do if somebody has mental illness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's really critical. I think one of the key differences, Brad, that makes it a little more complicated when you're dealing with mental health challenges is that mental health challenges, of course, are on a spectrum.
Yes.
And so if you have someone coming into your office, you're a pastor or a rabbi and a mom, and a couple comes in and they're having marital struggles, and you're interacting with them and you see that one of the individuals perhaps is depressed. Well, you know, when you're having marital struggles, that can lead to depression for some people, and discerning if that is just a depression that's circumstantial related to the struggles in that marriage, or if it's really a more significant clinical kind of depression that would require intervention, really is a discernment that faith leader has to walk through and exercise.
Right.
So part of what we're trying to do in our work with faith leaders is help them understand what are the typical symptoms of various diagnoses. What are the flags that would say, whoa, this is out of your depth. This is a case that's significant enough that you need to refer out to a clinician, and trying to encourage those faith leaders to establish relationships in their community with clinicians they're comfortable working with.
Absolutely.
So my dad was a pastor, Brad. I don't know if I shared that with you. And I'll never forget growing up, he had 2 psychiatrists who were members of the church.
Yes.
And he didn't do this weekly. He didn't even do this monthly. But very regularly, he would just get up and from the pulpit, he would say, if you're struggling with depression or you're struggling with anxiety or some other real challenge, we have 2 psychiatrists in our church. I would be happy to give you a referral. You let me know. And he just destigmatized the whole idea of needing help from a psychiatrist.
Oh, yeah.
Because he just spoke of it from the pulpit, just like he was talking about someone who had a cancer diagnosis or someone who had high blood pressure who needed to go see their doc.
Yep.
So that's what we want to encourage in our faith communities, is that there's sufficient knowledge to be able to discern when the case is one you need to refer out, and that there are established relationships between that faith leader and clinicians in the community so that there's comfort in referring out to that clinician.
Absolutely. And what a wonderful thing that your dad did for those who struggled. I mean,
exactly.
That's as simple as, sometimes we make this a lot more complicated than what it maybe needs to be. And it's just little things like that can normalize it for everybody. Yeah. So would there be anything, our listeners are leaders as well as clinicians, but mostly probably those who struggle. Is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners today who are taking time to hear this podcast?
Well, I think the most important message I could give to those who are listening today, Brad, is that each one of us are made in the image of God. Each one of us live in a fallen world. And that means that each one of us experience brokenness in different ways.
Yes.
Some people experience brokenness in that they have high blood pressure.
Yep.
Some people, like me, I experienced brokenness in that my body had a weakness that I didn't know about, and I was diagnosed with lymphoma.
Sure.
So some people experience brokenness with mental health challenges.
Yep.
And it's just another form of brokenness that's a part of our humanity.
Yep.
And so I just encourage your listeners to revel in the fact that they're fearfully and wonderfully made, that the challenges they face are a part of the beautiful tapestry that is who they are. My sweet family member describes his story by saying, "I'm like a stained glass window. It's a beautiful picture made up of many broken pieces."
Yeah. That's a beautiful description. Yeah.
I think that's just and he said it so much more eloquently than I just said it, but I just think that's a really beautiful picture that is true of every single one of our lives. Just that brokenness shows up differently in different people.
Yep.
And so my encouragement to your listeners would be to just rest in that reality, and when you need help, reach out and ask someone to help you, whether that's a faith leader, a friend, a family member, a clinician. There are people who love you and want to serve you.
Yeah, wonderful words. And to those of you who are listening, I hope you heard that loud and clear. And if nothing else, the good thing with a podcast is you can rewind it and play it again and listen carefully to what Shannon just said, because it is about resting in God's grace and His mercy, and I would add one other type of brokenness to that list, or people who are broken, and those are the people who think they're not broken. That's brokenness.
Exactly. I call that the brokenness of arrogance.
Yes, there you go.
Exactly. They just think they're so perfect, they're not broken.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And I'm very good at helping people discover that. So if you think you're not broken and you're listening today, send me an email. I'll help you. Yeah, we're all broken. And the wonderful thing is we are not defined by our brokenness, but we're defined by what God has done and is doing with our brokenness.
Exactly.
And that's the beauty of that stained glass window. Well, thank you so much, Shannon, for being a guest today. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
And you and Ben just are great people and wonderful to work with. And I've enjoyed being part of the process here and there. And I wanted our listeners to know about it and to meet somebody who's within the government, legally within the government, and helping connect our communities. What a wonderful thing. So thank you so
Brad,
much. Yes.
Before we get off, I just wanted to make sure and provide our email address.
Oh, yes, please.
For anyone who wanted to reach out to us.
That'd be wonderful.
They can reach us at partnerships, with an S, partnerships at hhs.gov. That's partnerships at hhs.gov.
Yeah. And these folks are real people, and they care, and they're people of faith themselves. And it's not about one particular faith. It's about all faiths. In our case, I'm a Christian, and so Fresh Hope is about connecting the Christian community with clinicians and helpers. But thank you again so much for being here today. Well, my friend, we want to thank you for listening to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I know it's been helpful to you. I hope and pray that you'll pass it along to others, that they might too hear the encouragement and just that little bright spot of hope there of connecting the faith community and the mental health community together. And we'd really like to hear from you, so you could email me at pastorbrad@freshhope.us, share your ideas, ask a question. Maybe you would like to be interviewed on the program. And you can always leave a voicemail on our podcast website. And you can find us on all the normal social media sites. And at the time of this recording, we are very close to having a new book come out called Holding to Hope, Staying Sane While Loving Someone with a Mental Illness. And so I hope that you'll take advantage of that and look for it here in the very near future. Now, would you mind doing me a favor? Please take a little time, if you're listening through iTunes, to just write a little review about this podcast, and it helps others find us more easily. So be sure and tell your friends about the podcast. And until the next time, my friend, may the Lord hold you with his hope, fresh and new daily. I'm Brad Hafs, and this has been another edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health.
You've been listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. If you have an opportunity, please review, share, and subscribe to the Fresh Hope for Mental Health podcast on iTunes or on the service that you use. We encourage you to share our podcast on social media with your friends and family. Previous podcasts of Fresh Hope for Mental Health can be found at freshhopeformentalhealth.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher Radio, and iTunes. Fresh Hope is one of the leading networks of faith-based peer support groups internationally. For more information about Fresh Hope, go to freshhope.us.